How often do you create an amazing 4 bar or 8 bar loop with all the bells and whistles and ear candy, the leads, the rhythm section, and catchy melodies, only to get stuck and be completely unable to create another section to that song? Do you have multiple song ideas like that on your computer? Is your hard drive full of them? Are you creating beautifully mixed and sometimes even mastered loops, but you can't get to the next part of the song? If you can do one awesome loop for one song, how come you just can't come up with a new part for that song? This is where so many of us get stuck. In this episode of the Music Production Podcast, I'm going to explain why we get stuck in short loops and unfinished ideas. And later on, I'll talk about how even when we have fully written songs, we can still get stuck and be unable to move forward. The problem is we're trying to finish our songs before they're finished. We've worked so hard on one section of a song, and now anything we add to it will feel incomplete and empty. And even if we manage to come up with a new part after we made a whole complete section of a song, there won't be any consistency between the parts because they were constructed separately from each other. Think about painting. Watch Bob Ross. He doesn't perfect one little mountain and then one part of the sky and one happy little tree over here. First, he gets the background of the entire painting done. Then he adds in the next layer, maybe a distant tree or the mountain. Then he adds some foreground elements. He doesn't focus on one corner of the painting first. He builds it in layers. It's a continual process of building up the entire painting together. Otherwise, there'd be clear and unnatural sections in his sky. The distant forest wouldn't blend with the bushes that are up front, and the bushes in this part of the painting wouldn't look right with the bushes that are on this part of the painting. He paints with a big brush first, then moves into the smaller brushes and the smaller brushes as he's doing more detail work. And that's how we have to do it with our music. And by the way, I wrote a little book called What Bob Ross Teaches Us About Music Production. It takes some of his lessons in painting and life and applies it to making music. Overworking and mixing and mastering one section of our song will get you stuck, and it's really a way of avoiding moving forward and making new decisions in our song. It's kind of like a writer working on one chapter and perfecting it, editing it, getting every single line right. Then when they go on to chapter 2, everything they write is going to be unedited, underdeveloped, and it's going to feel weak by comparison. Or picture a carpenter building a house. Imagine if they just started with one wall. They put up the wall, they hang the drywall, they start painting it, they put pictures on it, then they move on to the next wall of the house and they finish that wall. That's not how it works. A writer starts with some notes, then they create an outline, then a rough draft, then they edit and refine. A carpenter builds a foundation, they frame out the entire house, they put it together in stages, not one piece at a time. It's pretty much the way everything is made. It starts with an idea and it's slowly built up until the whole thing is finished together. Things aren't made one part at a time, separate from each other. If they were, then they probably wouldn't work well together. They wouldn't fit together right. It's that way with our music. When we're making songs and tracks, the most important thing to do is to get to the end. In Ableton Live, I love to sketch out my ideas in session view, but once those sketches are done, I try to get into arrangement view as soon as possible. I want to plan out the path of the song. And sometimes I use other songs to help. Sometimes I start with common arrangements from a particular genre. I've even created a set of arrangement templates that use the structure of songs that I love to help me get started, and I can just kind of follow along. It's okay to start generic and then start to build in the details and add in or change the elements that make your song unique. To continue with the house building metaphor, often houses in a neighborhood all have the same general blueprint, but then people paint the houses different colors. They decorate the interior to reflect their personalities. The details are where the houses become homes. Same with your music. Follow what works in other songs and genres, use conventions, templates, and once you have that in place, then start adding the details and changing small things so that you can express yourself and be unique in your own way. But even when our songs are completely written, we can still run into the same problem of being unable to move forward. I'm in a 3-piece rock band called Some Good Evil, and recently we released our debut album. When it was time to record, we had all of our songs fully written. Some of the subtle movements and rhythms were being ironed out along the way, but we recorded the music in stages. First all the drums, then all the bass parts, then the guitars, etc. And in between those sessions, I had time to tinker with the parts we recorded. So after we recorded the drums, I tinkered with them and I mixed the drums to perfection. They sounded awesome on their own. They took up the entire frequency range and all my headroom, and they were huge and big and booming and powerful. I was really proud of them. Then when it was time to record the bass, I kind of realized the drums were a little too huge, so I had to make a little room for the bass before we could even record it. Then, in the meantime, I had a little time to myself and I started playing around with the bass and drums and I mixed it to sound really full. If it was just bass and drums, it would have been a great mix. But then it was time to record the guitars, so I had to make some room for the guitars. And since I'm the guitarist, I was left to my own devices, and I got a little crazy. I started doubling my parts, panning them left and right. They sounded really full. I added little licks and riffs in the gaps. I put acoustic guitars throughout every song and doubled them. It was like I'd built the most detailed house with all the custom furniture in every single possible space, but there was no room for any people. I had no room in my mix for the most important element of our songs, the vocals. And part of the reason I did that is because I was nervous about recording the vocals. Rather than try to do the hard work of singing, getting things in tune, getting the lyrics right, I decided to procrastinate and just mix things and mix things and mix things until I really had no choice but to work on the vocals. Now, there's no room in my mix for vocals. It was like I built the perfect home exercise gym with every piece of equipment possible, every new technology, but there was no room to actually use any of it because every piece of equipment was in the way of all the other equipment. I'd be better off with just an empty room to do some push-ups in. And this is how my songs were. I tried to finish it before it was finished. So I had to start taking things out. There were no need for 11 guitar tracks. The bass and drums cannot occupy the entire frequency range. I had to make room for the most important element of our songs, which was the vocals. I had to unbuild my house so I could actually walk around in it. And then everything sounded better. Once I had the pieces in place, then I can mix them with an understanding of how all of the elements affect each other. You can't do that if you don't have all the pieces in place first. There's no sense in overproducing the pieces of your songs before all the pieces are in place. It's not about how good a sound sounds on its own. It's about how it works together with the other sounds. And you need all of that stuff in place before you start going to these levels of detail in your mixes. The biggest reason we get stuck in our songs is because we overproduce the parts before all of the parts are in place. All of this can be pretty overwhelming. With so many possibilities and so many ways to get stuck and lose inspiration, getting started can be scary. What if I only end up with another unfinished idea? Filled with all this kind of fear, it's no wonder that so many producers put off making music, the very thing they love to do most, and give in to procrastination. Well, I've got a video here that'll help you understand why we procrastinate and help you overcome it once and for all. Thanks a lot for listening and watching the Music Production Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Funk. If you've enjoyed this, please rate it where you get your podcasts or like the video, give it a review, leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, and have a great day.